Hi guys, welcome to Lecture 5, Group Psychology and Emotion. So we saw how emotion kind of facilitated the growth and the development of social psychology. Now we're going to talk group psychology, but we're going to come at it from a strange-ass angle, I guarantee you. Again, we're doing the OH-IO pose. I love that. And what do we see here? What about that young man? I don't want to be that young man because this family has this picture and they are going to be showing this to everyone they know in the family. And that young man may never live this down all his life. I hope he's resilient and can deal, right? Yes, some of our most embarrassing moments. Question: is embarrassment an emotion? Be asking you that about all kinds of psychological constructs as the course goes. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about emotion contagion. We're going to talk about group psychology. We're going to talk about social identity theory for a little bit. We're going to talk about instinct conceptualizations and post-Freudian group psychology. Post-Freudian, well, that means we better tackle Freud from the very beginning here. And I want to talk about Freud's drive theory. So, in psychomotivation, we run into issues. Is it a drive? Is it a motivation? Are those two different? And in teaching both motivation and emotion, I'm becoming less clear on the relationship of all these components over time. I mean, I can tell a lot of different stories, but I'm not sure which story I necessarily buy yet, or if there's a complete story I have yet to hear, right? Now, Freud, the drive theory, Freud preferred the term affect to emotion. I'm on board with Freud, and I like the term affect. I like the term emotion, but I can differentiate them pretty readily as well. Emotion can be felt in consciousness, and it alters the body and the physiology, right? But affect is like this continuous stream of energy that exists within us, and it can fluctuate because sometimes our energy is rather low, that is, our affect is rather low, or it can be rather high, and it floats like this. More on that later. But when we talk Freud, we have to, a couple caveats about understanding Sigmund Freud. He's a moving target, and his ideas are always evolving, which is kind of a cool thing when you think about it, because it'd be a shame to be, like in your 30s and have an idea and then never move past that idea, just reiterate it over and over again. His ideas were always evolving, right? He was a neurologist and then becomes one of the preeminent psychiatrists in time, right? So, but he's a moving target. He wrote prolifically. I mean, he wrote. His theories were always evolving. So sometimes if we jump into Freud early on and we say, oh my God, that's what Freud said, but he's probably changed his stance on that somewhere down the line. So Freud often has to be taken as a body of work rather than picking and cherry picking various topics, right? He didn't return to clean up previous theorizations. So he didn't go, to the library and take that book off the shelf because it no longer applied and replaced it with a new one. All the writing is out there, and so depending on where we jump onto the Freud bus might create different impressions of Sigmund Freud. I'm a fan if you haven't picked up on that yet. Now, the topographical model of the mind, according to Freud, is there's three parts. There's the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. And to me, this is probably one of Freud's greatest contributions, is talking about conscious and unconscious. The preconscious is okay, but it's not necessary to the picture. He believed it was, but I'll make a case not necessarily. And then we got the mind then developed into three parts, the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. And then we have two psychic processes. And the first process is the primary process tied to the pleasure principle. And basically what this means is humans are driven to seek pleasure, right? This psychic process. Well, there's another way to state that. Seek pleasure or avoid unpleasure. And that is, we learn a noxious stimuli and we learn to avoid it. Right, so that's a powerful force in and of itself. And then wish fulfillment is seeking out pleasure. That is, the things that I imagine that I actually want to achieve necessarily. Now, the secondary process is a learned process, and that's delay of gratification via the reality principle. And this delay of gratification becomes an all-important predictor in human success. Now, You're probably familiar with the concept of the marshmallow test, and that is where people were tested to see how children were tested to see how long they could resist a single marshmallow, on the promise if they successfully resist that single marshmallow for 10 minutes, they can have 2 marshmallows at the end of the 10 minutes. So the ability to delay gratification. This is something that's been discussed and has tremendous empirical evidence as a predictor of success in life, right? So one is primary, and that's instinctual. The secondary one is largely learned. Look at this. So I was given the opportunity to take a psychology abroad trip to Germany, Belgium, and London with 17 students, mostly psychology students, and what a fascinating trip, what a great time. I was a last minute selection. The person who organized the trip turned out they couldn't go at the last minute, so they asked me if I'd step in so they didn't have to call off the trip, and I'm like, yeah, definitely. We were in Sigmund Freud's house in London. Now, he only lived in this house for about 8 months or a year, right, because he was born in Vienna, he was born in Austria, right, and he escaped prior to the clutches of Nazism, which is a good idea if you're a German Jew to get the hell out of town, or an Austrian Jew to get the hell out of town, because it didn't go so well for other folks, right? So who didn't escape. But this is his place in London, and you can see, yeah, that is the couch there. That is the couch. So the few people that he did do psychoanalysis on in London would sit on this couch, and he sat on the chair at the end of the couch, that green chair you can barely see, and he was a tremendous collector of antiquities. He loved collecting, and those are all over the place. Here's another picture of the perpetual Freud in front of a bay window on the street, second floor. It's actually in the stairway. And believe it or not, some of these plants are cuttings from the time when Freud actually lived in the house. And I love plants and I love gardening, so that turned me on as well. It's like everything comes together here on this trip. Now, the topography of the mind, as we were describing, then you can see you have the ego, so it's the iceberg, and the iceberg metaphor that Freud was using. He says 1/7 of the mind exists above the surface, which represents the conscious, what we have access to. 6/7 below the water, hidden from us. And people have, it was originally 1/7 versus 6/7. Most people now 10% versus 90%. It doesn't really matter a lot, right? But what do we have? Well, the ego, that's the thinking part of us, and that operates on the reality principle, the secondary process thinking. So this is what we hopefully develop as part of our socio-emotional development, that we learn right from wrong, right? And the superego then gives us right or wrong. Ego allows us to interact it, right? So the superego is developed through our parents, through our relationship to religion, to school, to society, to the law. Now, the id is the primitive portion where the pleasure principle exists, right? And this is the primary process thinking, wish fulfillment. It's largely biological, right? And the instincts of eros and thanatos coming up, right, then drive us to want, right, or to avoid. Superego says, hey, this is what society will allow, and now ego's got the bitch of a job to try and reconcile the id's urges, impulses, desires with the rules of society. And it's what grows out of this then is we have 3 separate portions of the mind. Well, the id and the superego are often in conflict. And that's why they call it psychodynamic theory, because the psyche is dynamic, right? And it's in conflict. And it's the ego's job to resolve the conflict. Stay within the bounds, but satisfy the needs of the id. Freud paints an amazing picture of us, and this is another tremendous contribution, that we are beings in conflict, right? So, each process, though, is concerned with mental energy. Mental energy arises in the body and mind are connected. Conflict is the result of the processes. Now, one system discharges the energy, so I may be hungry, and that's causing this energy, and fulfilling by eating then will reduce the energy. Or I might have a sexual impulse, and we know Freud that was a lot about sex, right? So I might have the sexual impulse, that is the drive, right? And the drive becomes more and more impactful. And so the stream of energy increases until I find a way to satisfy that urge, right? And then I satisfy the urge, and then the energy then dissipates, right? So when the system operates to discharge the energy, but there are constraints on what we can do via the superego, so one system operates to delay the discharge until it's appropriate to do so. So the overarching constancy principle explains that these opposing processes want to keep stimulation, this energy, to an overall relatively low, comfortable, kind of soothing level, right? Maybe we can put this in terms of to maintain a balance to kind of tie us to other theorists that we talk about in the course. So low levels of energy represent we're alive, and they're thought to be pleasant, right? High levels, though, these high drive states that are unfulfilled, right, build to high levels and they're unpleasant. So the goal is to discharge that high level of energy in some way to reduce that tension. And obviously, when we're talking Freud, that could be sexual tension, but it could be the tension as far as eating, a cigarette smoker, right? I've got this drive, I feel this need to smoke, and the desire to smoke becomes greater and greater as my nicotine becomes depleted. So I'm driven to engage in the smoking behavior to deplete that pent-up you want a cigarette energy, right? All the time the superego is admonishing me, Mark, smoking is killing you. You shouldn't be doing that. It's expensive. You're going to get cancer, right? And the ego is then trying to find a way that I can reduce this energy. We're a mess when we talk psychodynamic theory, right? So we see the superego is running the morality principle there, what's allowed, what's okay, what we want to do, right? The id is saying, do it, do it, do it. The superego is saying, no, don't do that, it might be wrong, right? Remember the cartoon with the angel on one shoulder? Oh, don't do that, that would be wrong. And then we got the devil on the other shoulder whispering in the other ear going, do it, you know it would feel good, right? Who's stuck the hell in between? Us, the ego. Trying to listen here, and trying to make both of these happy. And you know, you can see that Freud set us up to be a real mess. Right? So, then, what do we know? 2 drives. And we located those down in the id, if you remember, the eros. This drive, this instinct, Freud says we have an instinct to create, to live, to maintain ourselves, to bring into being. And the emotional correlate here might be love, if you will. And if we're going to call love an emotion, which is still up for grabs in this course. Thanatos, on the other hand, is this competing drive to consume, to destroy, to kill, to die. All these are necessary aspects of the big picture of life, right? Now, the emotional correlate there might be aggression. Now, the affect is seen as the qualitative expression of the quantity of the drive's mental energy. So when I get to Freud and I start thinking affect, and this one kind of sticks with me, even though I might abandon aspects of Freudian theorizing or psychodynamic theory, one thing that kind of does resonate and kind of sticks, at least for me, and see what happens as you move through the course, is we have this continuous stream of affect, maybe a life force. And most of the time at a low level, it's pleasant, right? But then when drives make themselves known, the affective stream increases in its potency, right? And then I seek to discharge that. So maybe I feel antsy and I need to get up and move about or whatever it might be. So affect might just be this continuous stream that I live with, 24/7, 365 for my entire life. So the drive gratification then, positive affects are associated with pleasure and are the result of successful gratification of the drive. So if I'm hungry and I find something satisfying to eat, cool. If I'm feeling the desire to smoke and then I pick up a cigarette, it reduces that affective tension down to a pleasant level at that point. Negative affects are associated with unpleasure and result from inhibiting drives. That is, oh my God, I'm starving. And I say, but Mark, you should be on a diet. You've gained 15 pounds since you've been confined to your home. You're looking like a rotunda. There's an interesting word. You're turning into a rotunda, and I don't want to look at myself that way, right? So now although I want to go down and get a bowl of Cheez-Its, I'm not going to, but God, oh, I want that Cheez-Its, and now see, I'm in this state of unpleasure, right? And really, one of the best ways to eliminate that is to go eat the Cheez-Its. But then I have to admonish myself because I'm not doing what I should be doing, right? So to satisfy id impulses in an acceptable way is called sublimation, and causes the experience of pleasure and positive emotions. So sublimation is somehow, I'm hungry, I got to convince myself that a bag full of carrot sticks would be freaking awesome and the way to go. Notice, I fill my belly, so I satisfy the desire to eat, but I've done it in a way that is morally and socially acceptable, consistent with my goals, right? So that would be sublimation, is doing it the right way. To satisfy impulses in an unacceptable way in the pursuit of pleasure leads to guilt or shame. And guilt, shame are huge with Freud. These are core things, right? Now this depends on the superego development. Realize that an undeveloped superego will not generate a shame or guilt response. This makes the study of psychopathy, which we're going to talk about later in the course, pretty interesting, because it's pretty much agreed that psychopaths don't feel guilt, right? So what does that mean in terms of their superego development? Okay, so more on that later though. So for Freud, ideas and affect then, what do we know? Ideas are memories that are attached to affective experience, and this is how we build up our life history and our relationship to our world. To understand Freudian repression then, it's important to acknowledge the separation of idea and affect, right? So if ideas are memories but not the affect themselves, right, it's the stories we tell ourselves about the affect, right? It's the way we explain the affective stream that we're experiencing. So we have this experience, affect stream fluctuating. Now we have to, in fact, explain what this fluctuation is. What is going on with me that I feel this or I feel this way, right? And the ideas then are recollections of the situational components that are occurring with the affective stream and its fluctuations. By the way, that's the outside of Freud's house there, right, in London, and it's cool. And notice those blue plaques in between the windows. One of those is, that's what they do in England, is they say this is a famous place, this is Sigmund Freud's house. But this house is so famous that it gets two plaques. One says it's Sigmund Freud's house. What does the other plaque say, you guys? You psychological trivia wizards? Anna Freud's house. So Anna Freud lived in the house of Sigmund Freud, and they each get their own plaque, right? So now, one of the purposes of psychoanalysis, that is Freud's talking therapy, if you will, is to align affect with ideas. So it's to bring together and understand the relationship of the ideas, the responses, and the memories associated with affect. And notice, if we're talking in terms of memories, this is why psychoanalysis often has to go back, theoretically, to earlier times to look where these ideas, these explanations of the affective stream changes, right? So conflicts, negative affects associated to ideas have potential to make one feel anxious. And that is, these mismatches, right, often lead to what Freud would call signal anxiety. And then signal anxiety, that is the tension. Something's going wrong here. My ideas and my affect are not aligned, right? Then I'm going to use defense mechanisms because I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to bring it out in the open. It's painful. It's going to make me feel anxious or guilty. So I want to try and get around that, right? And that's why I employ the defense mechanisms. Repression is one example of defense avoidance in the conflict, essentially repressing the increased level of energy. That is, not acknowledging it, not accepting it, ignoring it, telling a story that makes it inconsequential. The problem with the defense mechanisms is, for the most part, most of the defense mechanisms then operate by distorting one's relationship with reality, one's perception of reality. So let's take another iceberg picture here. So what do we have then? We have the conscious up top. We have the preconscious, which is the area of the mind that we might not be thinking about right now, but if we turn our attention towards it, we can access it. The unconscious is largely inaccessible, right? So what we're talking about then is it's time to enter into our discussion of emotion versus cognition, right? That is, does Freud's ideas represent the cognitive process, the rationalization of this? And if so, does the affect map neatly onto a simple conception of emotion? I don't know. And that's something for you to consider, because you're going to have to build your own damn definition of what is emotion. So just tossing it out there for you to consider. Let's talk about two other defense mechanisms then, displacement and projection. There's 8 defense mechanisms altogether for Sigmund Freud. You are a big psychological trivia fan if you can name all 8, right? Repressed mental energy continues to percolate and seek release. It doesn't go anywhere. So there it is. I've repressed it. It doesn't go away. I've simply repressed it. And it's going to find a way out one way or another, often with unfortunate circumstances. One of these is projection. It allows us to project one's own anger onto a target, seeing anger in the self as coming from another. I don't know why you're always so angry. And if we ever hear ourselves saying that, you know, Freud would say, well, are they angry, or are you projecting your anger onto them because you've repressed it? It's not like the anger goes away, it's just you've repressed it, and now you accuse others of being angry, or more willing to interpret their ambiguous behaviors as being anger. Right? Displacement allows a safe target for the expression of anger when the target is prohibited. So if you're angry at your boss, maybe you come home and you yell at your partner, because your partner is a safe anger target where your boss was not. Notice, the release of the energy is the goal, one way or another. Anxiety and guilt predominate affects to be repressed, but have the potential to be transformed into other affects as well. So let's leave it at that for a minute. Check out the frickin' funny-ass cartoon. It's one of my favorites. Maybe, maybe not. And let's take a breath. Prepare for part 2.